All right, everybody. So today we are going to be learning about housing insecurity and homelessness at different stages of someone's life. And we're going to focus on the multi-generational aspect of homelessness and housing insecurity, as well as just recognizing some of the unique and overlapping challenges that each group faces. I wanted to note that before we begin discussing this, just keep in mind that homelessness and housing security are not exactly linear. They can happen at any point in anyone's life, and this issue does fall on a spectrum. So that's what we're going to be observing primarily today. I'm sorry if you can hear my phone vibrating. It'll probably vibrate. I'm trying to mute it. Okay, there we go. And then lastly, just before I move forward completely into this topic, I just want to let y'all know that this topic is pretty sensitive. The things we're going to be watching can be triggering to some folks. You know, I want you all to think critically, but I also want you to treat yourself with kindness and being gentle with yourself throughout this entire conversation. But with that, let's do it. I already gave you a little overview talking about housing insecurity and homelessness today. Alrighty, so before we even start viewing some of the materials that we're going to be talking about today, let's just do a little bit of thinking about our everyday vernacular, our speech surrounding this issue, and this issue specifically of homelessness and housing insecurity. And the goal of this is so that we can be intentional about our words and what they mean and how we use them every day. So my question for you is this: what does it mean to be homeless, and what does it mean to be housing insecure? And are they the same? Are they different? And why? So I'll give you all 2 to 3 minutes to think about this. I'll mute myself so you can have your peace and quiet, and then I'll paste that question in the chat for everybody. So let's do a little thinking. Alrighty, so that question is up for grabs. We're just gonna do a little bit of throwing some ideas around. So if you have anything, you can type it into the chat. You could utilize your mic.
So when I don't even fully, I think, know the full like definition or what like both of these words incorporate. But when I think of homeless, I tend to think of literally having no home, no shelter, and not residing to any, I guess just home in general. And then when I think of housing insecure, I think that you have shelter, you do have homes, like emphasizing that it is insecure, so you can move from place to place. When I think of, and that's kind of like why I wanted to almost like ask like almost as a question, but like when it comes to like couch surfing, are you homeless or are you housing insecure? I also think that these are both interdependent and cohesive. I think that you can be homeless and struggle with housing insecurity, and vice versa. But I feel like it may differ depending on the circumstances and situations that you're presented. I do believe that the consequences, or not consequences, but the struggles may be similar, like depending on, I guess.
Anyone want to expand on that? These are great guesses.
I was kind of thinking the same thing. So I feel like homeless is like you literally have like no house, like literally like no place to go. But maybe housing insecure is more like you may have like a house, like a home, but you just don't feel at home, if that makes sense. Like you just, like you might have that place to go, but you just, I don't know how to, like in my mind it makes sense, but out loud it just doesn't make sense. But you know what I mean? Like homeless, I feel like it's just, you just can't go anywhere. There's nowhere to go. Housing insecure, maybe you have like a house, a home, but you just don't see it as your home, like that warm place, if that makes sense.
I think housing insecurity could also be just like not knowing if you're going to be able to afford to live there the next like month or the next whenever your like pay period is. So I think like homelessness is like definitely not having, I mean, that doesn't mean that you can be homeless and be couch surfing, I think. I mean, in my opinion, I don't know the actual definition, but you could be homeless and be couch surfing. You could be homeless and like living on like someone else's property. But I think the difference between homelessness and housing insecurity is just that like when you're housing insecure, it doesn't necessarily mean that like you don't have a place at that period of time, but you don't know if it will be there later.
Right, and I really like what you said about consistency. I know I misspelled it. Listen, It's a Thursday night. It's basically Friday, people, okay? But just the idea of consistency and having a plan B, because for a lot of individuals, yes, you can be at plan A, and this could be at any context. You can have a plan A, but not exactly know where you're going. So I really like that you carried that idea that Anna and Maria had touched upon and really expanded upon it. So thank you so much for that, my friends. We're gonna talk a little bit about those differences that we pointed out as a team, and then we will take it from there. I also want to let y'all know we're going to be watching primarily videos today. And I did, Jalen, I know you came a little bit late, but I did let our friends know that these videos, some of them are very sensitive, some of them can be triggering. So just treat yourself with kindness and be gentle with yourself. Of course, think critically, contribute, but also, take time to digest things as we move forward. And that goes for everybody, but I definitely just wanted to reiterate that as we move forward into some of the deeper content. But great things. That was wonderful. Y'all are very smart individuals, if I do say so myself. So now we're gonna move into the idea that Anna had brought up about shelter. So the definition of shelter, I'm not gonna read it to you because we can all read, right? At least I hope you can. If you can't, that's okay. No one's judging you. 19 and never learned how to read. I'm joking. But when it comes to shelter, literally it's just a place that gives you protection and coverage. That is the bare minimum of what shelter means. But I wanted to give you this definition because I want to let you know that although this is the bare basics of what shelter means, I want to make the distinction of shelter for a typical person and shelter for a homeless or housing insecure person. So the word shelter in this context that we're going to be using it throughout today's little presentation is not to be taken literally. So this is, again, very basic, but it doesn't really encompass all of the topics that we're going to talk about today. And this is how a typical person who has no experience with anybody who is homeless or housing insecure may view the word shelter. But for this population, the word's a little bit deeper than that. It's more sensitive and it has some different connotations. So let's move into the underlying distinction of the word shelter. So homeless individuals can be unsheltered or they can be sheltered. And I say this because when we're talking about this word shelter, and I'm going to be saying this a lot, the difference when it comes to our homeless individuals is that shelter needs to be safe, livable, and it has to be something that is consistent. Even if it's only temporary, you need to be able to get into some sort of routine where you know where you're sleeping, you know where your meals are coming from. Safe, livable, consistent. That's what we think of when we hear the word shelter. So when it comes to homeless individuals, which we touched upon earlier, a lot of you guessed that homeless individuals were unsheltered. Without even knowing the word, you thought, of course, homeless individuals are unsheltered, which is true. So I'll give you some examples. This includes people who are living in tents, cars, and abandoned buildings. You're probably thinking, though, those places have roofs over them. There's 4 walls and a roof, so it's shelter. Actually, because it's not safe or livable, these places are not considered shelter, even despite the fact they literally cover one's head. So are you seeing the difference between shelter and shelter? Because although something can literally perform the action of covering you, that doesn't make it safe. And I wanted to also elaborate on the idea of living in a tent, living in a car, living in an abandoned building. These places are also not considered shelter because they don't have resources like running water, electricity, amenities, bathrooms, protection from weather, and they also don't have any privacy or security, which deems them as unsafe living areas, which doesn't make them shelter, despite what they look like to the human eye. On the other hand, housing insecure individuals to some extent have access to livable shelter. This is not to say that they're in a perfect situation and they're safe or in a very reliable situation, but they do have an area that is livable in the sense that there's running water, electricity, there's some source of food, you can protect yourself against weather, and you do have that sense of privacy and security. So for instance, this would be living on someone's couch, living in a motel, or maybe living in a homeless shelter. You have access to human resources who are able to provide for you. They know about your situation, and you're able to access those basic human needs, those basic amenities that we expect to have as human beings. This is not to frame one situation as better off or worse off than the other. This is just to demonstrate that there are different types of homelessness. There are different types of homeless individuals out there. This is a spectrum. Homelessness works to a degree, and people can shift upon that spectrum or they can stay in one place along that spectrum. But it just goes to show that homelessness and housing insecurity, although yes, you can be both at the same time, you can also be one or you can be the other, or you can just drift between each group. And this is something that the media, that society doesn't really touch upon. Although I would never ask you to do this, if I asked you to draw an image of a homeless person, which one of these pictures would you have drawn? And give me a show of hands. Who votes for the one with the person sleeping on the couch? I'd probably draw that because that's my experience as a homeless and housing insecure individual. So how many of you would draw the young man on the park bench sleeping with a piece of newspaper over him? And that says something about how we as outsiders and society members, even me as a homeless individual myself, that's what I thought the world had cut out for me. That's why I didn't really identify as homeless, because I said, oh, I can never be that. I would never look like that. However, there are degrees to every situation. So what I wanted to let you all know is that there's a difference, there's a distinction. And this definitely changes the way you think about the two words, housing insecure and homeless. And as I mentioned earlier, yes, they can overlap. You can be both groups simultaneously, or you can be one or the other. But unfortunately, what we see every day and what we expect is the image on the left. And just running with that idea of having different degrees of homelessness and seeing the stereotypes, we're going to watch some videos that demonstrate this different spectrum. So part of recognizing this issue of homelessness and housing insecurity and dismantling it is that we want to attack the stigma and pull it apart. We need to pull it apart and realize this looks different for every situation. So we're going to look at 3 different generations of individuals who identify as homeless or housing insecure. You know, sometimes the words can be interchangeable, sometimes they can't be. It all depends on situation. And then we're going to note some of the opportunities and some of the challenges that they were faced with. And we're going to start at the high school level by watching this video of Desmond Davis. And just as we're going through this, definitely note some of the challenges that Desmond faces and some of the opportunities that Desmond is given. Are there any challenges? Are there any opportunities? And if so, what are they? Just keep that in the back of your pocket for when we do our next exercise together as a group. Can we hear?
My name is Desmond Davis. I am a senior at North Dallas High School. My college plans is to attend OSU for graphic design and music. For the past 6 years, I was moving from place to place to place. I've been to a total of 12 houses during that time period. The main reason why I had to move from place to place to place because most of the people I was staying with, they had families of their own. I wasn't with my mom because my dad had retrieved custody of me due to neglect. And the reason why I wasn't with my dad because he was out working to support me. And he's a truck driver. Some days I'll say to myself, am I really homeless right now? Because at some point it felt like I didn't have help. That's why I could probably say I felt homeless. And then the other side of me, I said, well, I'm not going to claim that on myself because that's not stopping me from doing what I need to do in school.
North Dallas has probably one of the largest populations of homeless students here. And usually my list will range anywhere from 80 to about 120. But just here recently, and on my last report, it was probably more like 160.
On the forest with just 1 or 2 types of trees?
No. In the area I grew up in, most of those kids don't even make it out of high school. And I said, I had to change for myself. I keep pushing. School was like another home. And when I got into band, I felt like that's another family. playing baritone and just music, being in band in general, changed my whole perspective on life. That was a place where I know I can express myself truly and fully.
Part of the reason there is a large number of homeless students in North Dallas High School is because there are a couple homeless shelters located within the boundary lines of this school. Additionally, we have a support network here in place that says, no matter what happens, we are going to help take care of you and you are not alone. And those students that need that extra support come here to get it, and we love having them here. Desmond is absolutely a hard worker for me. I think part of what makes Desmond who he is his ability to overcome any adversity that he has to deal with in his life. His home circumstances were something that I became aware of shortly after I met him, because he came to me personally and said, I'm not always going to be able to be at everything after school because sometimes I have a ride home and sometimes I don't.
It was a point where I was staying with my grandmother, and as I was walking towards my bus stop, I was robbed at gunpoint.
After that incident happened, he then began to stay with friends and did a little couch surfing. And knowing what a good student Desmond was, I wanted to encourage the environment to be consistent with him as a student. And so then I approached CJ. And CJ, who always had such a wonderful heart, he agreed that he would help him and take him in and start getting him to school every day.
I believe, everyone needs a family. Everyone needs somebody to come home to it, because I had a great family and they gave me great direction. So I want to give them, I want to bless them with that direction. Sometimes families fall on hard times. Sometimes family goes somewhere. Sometimes family is there, but they just can't help and they won't ask for help. When you could get here from school, if you see this topsoil is dry, go and put some water on it. Put like a gallon of water on it. I'll say this is grandmother's plant. This one put out.
That one.
This one might put out.
Yeah. He is family. Because, like I said, he didn't have to take me in. I could have been still traveling from house to house to house to house. But he said, come on. I'll welcome you in just as long as you do your chores.
You'll be brought up like you was my godson. And I'm going to raise you, on those rules and regulations that I was raised on. And I said, you have opportunity to actually have a family. I'm going to watch out for you and look out for you and make sure you graduate on time. And I said, if you're willing to actually take that opportunity and everything like that, I'll be there for you all the time. You can't go wrong. You can always add more.
Always add more.
Yeah, there you go.
CJ means a whole lot to me. Something he do, he actually don't even have to be doing right now. He just do this because he wants to do it. He wants to see people do better,
Set. Mark. Time.
I respect Desmond for being the young man that he is. He is a strong leader. He is a strong person, and he has always been willing to use his leadership and his inner strength to help other people.
I believe the best thing about me being drum major this year is I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to let people know that I'm going to represent North Dallas High School Band proudly.
It's kids like Desmond that makes my job worth doing every day, because he shows me not only you can make it regardless of where you're from, but he also shows that to other students. I'm really proud of you. Thank you. You're gonna go far.
Again, keeping in mind the challenges and opportunities that our friend Desmond faced, and definitely bring those up when we get to the exercise. But now we're going to move into what it looks like for college students, which is very relevant to all of us today. So let's move forward with that.
Jasmine Bighand, a college senior, can almost taste graduation. Like most students here at Humboldt State University, nestled in the shade of the California redwoods, finals are coming, and she's studying hard But it's her life outside her college classroom that may be the toughest test of all.
The hardest thing was just like not being able to find housing. And that was like the big issue that stood in my way.
So what'd you do?
I lived in my car and then I kind of couch surfed. After that, I moved into like this big trailer. And then the trailer roof collapsed a little bit.
All of that makes the van she now lives in seem not so bad. Yes, a van. She lives here in a parking lot, not far from the library.
Here is where I keep all my like bathroom supplies. And then here is where I keep like my pots and pans.
Being homeless isn't something you'd expect from a student on a Ford Family Foundation scholarship. But even that money wasn't enough to help with the high cost of housing near campus.
There was some like emotional points, you know, where I just was like crying because it was hard. Like, you know, how I think about things is like, I put myself here, so I had to deal with it.
But you put yourself here for a good reason, though, to get through school.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a goal at the end of the tunnel, I guess.
Every morning, she makes her way to a women's locker room on campus. Here, she brushes her teeth, showers, and then heads off to class. Later, it's back to the van.
What is it that's so important for you to go to school and get your degree that you'd sort of put yourself through all of this?
You know, like I'm going to go become something and I'm going to succeed in it and keep trying. You know, things are hard, like you just got to keep trying.
The number of homeless college students struggling just like Jasmine is hard to quantify, but it's big. According to financial aid applications, there are more than 68,000 students who claim to be homeless.
I think the idea that hardworking, talented people who are trying to get an education are being derailed by homelessness is a crisis.
Sarah Goldrick-Rabb is the leading national researcher on the problem. She's founder of the Hope Center and a professor of higher education policy at Temple University in Philadelphia.
One of the things that's changed in the United States over time is that if you grow up without money, we have sent a pretty strong signal to those students that financial aid is available and you should try college because it's your route out of poverty.
So part of the problem is that people who weren't going to college before
go to college now. It's hard to view that as a problem. I'd say the problem is that they're going to college, but we didn't build the support for them.
Unlike elementary and secondary school students whose families can get some support from things like federal free breakfast and lunch programs, for college students, much of that assistance dries up.
every time you tell people about this problem, they seem surprised.
Right, shocked, exactly. I mean, it's been hidden. I think a lot of people didn't talk about it. I also think that most people just think about tuition. They don't think about living.
Some of those struggling with housing responded to a recent survey that Goldrick-Rabb conducted. It was the largest of its kind ever done, involving more than 43,000 students at 66 institutions. The result? Nearly 1 in 10 college students said they were homeless in the last year, meaning they had at least one night where they didn't know where they were going to sleep.
I tend to think the people who are struggling the most are not taking our surveys. And that's the part that scares me, right? Is the possibility.
But you don't know how deep the problem really
the problem is actually a lot worse.
Colleges generally don't like to talk about homelessness, she says, and neither do most students. Dom Cornell is a 22-year-old undergraduate at DePaul University in Chicago.
I didn't want anybody to look at me different. So you just kept it to yourself. Yeah. There's that underlying feeling of just shame. That feeling of loneliness.
He's studying political science with the hopes of one day going to law school.
My dad never went to college. My mom never went to college. I'd be the first person. I knew I had to do it.
Dom's parents have been out of the picture since childhood. His mom had struggled with addiction, and his dad has been in and out of prison. Money for his tuition comes from a patchwork of funding, scholarships, student loans, and some financial aid. He stretched all of that as far as he could. But last spring, he found himself living in a shelter outside of town.
Sometimes you don't make it to the shelter in time because you have to be there at a certain time to get in. Sometimes I had to sleep in parks or in forests.
How often would you go hungry?
Like 2 days without really eating a meal.
2 days?
I hate to say it, but I've eaten out of the trash before. When you're just trying to survive, you'll do whatever it takes.
He had to sneak onto a commuter train just to get to class most days. And one day, it almost became too much to bear.
Okay. So I cut another one short. The reason I cut it was because I want you to finish the rest of the video on your own, because it talks about some of the resources that the college provides for these students. I also cut it because of time, but this is definitely something that will be sent to you, and you can check out the rest of it on your own time.
I saw this on the news and I was like, wow. I think maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't. I don't know. It was on Snapchat. It was like college students created this shelter because they know like there's a lot of like college students in their like university that were like struggling with that. So they created a shelter, and I was like, oh my God, like this should be something that every college university has. I don't know. I just loved it. I wanted to like look into it, but I was like studying, so I didn't. I'm gonna look into it because I love it. It's in California. They opened like 2 already, and it's amazing.
The video that we watched, the college one, it actually features the student home at the end, but I had to cut it short. So if you want to watch the rest of it, that's exactly the same thing that is at the end of the video. So I couldn't show you all the great resources, but there was also another college had a food pantry established. The other one had a community house. The other one, it wasn't really a college community house, but it was off campus. But it does talk about the resources at the end, and it shows you where the students are now in relation to 2020. So I didn't want to spoil it for anybody, but I think I just did. But if you want to finish watching the video, 10 out of 10 would recommend. But I really want to move into the last section of individuals, which are non-students and adults who are in the workforce or unemployed. So this is a 2018-2019 documentary called Shelter. It is about I think it's 1 hour long. It's very graphic. I just want to start off by saying it's very graphic. It's very disturbing. I've watched it. And if you want to watch this, I recommend you do it at your own discretion. I am going to show you a few clips, none of which depict any of the graphic scenes at all. But just know that if you want to watch this on your own time, this will be provided to you as well.
What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about what we do. Let's talk about who we care for. We care for runaway, homeless, and at-risk youth. Most of our youth are between the ages of 16 and 22 years of age. I believe that we care for the most damaged population of youth that exists in society. We've gone from about 44 kids to 140 kids. 70 to 80% of our young people have been physically and/or sexually abused. 85% of our young people are suffering from some form of PTSD or profound trauma. Bipolar, paranoid schizophrenic, we're dealing with these issues. They got a lot of pain and sometimes a lot of anger. If not us, who? Right? If we turn them away, what happens to them? And that's what we're about. These are our lost sheep, and they've been entrusted to our care.
Excuse me, could y'all help me out with any quarters? All right, thank you anyway. Excuse me, could one of y'all help me out with some quarters? I'm just trying to catch the bus home. All right.
I'm just trying to get some food. Can you please help me out, please?
Oh, I don't have nothing, baby.
Okay.
That's 70 cents.
Yeah. You should be here. How much you gave me?
I gave you like 65 cents.
Give me that.
All right.
You go get it. For 40.
All right. A 40 of OE.
My feet hurt so bad. There you go. Here you go, Taylor. It's okay.
Do you know Jesus? Do you know Jesus? Jesus when he touch you. Jesus when he holds you tight.
Speak it,
I
like.
say when Jesus came through, Jesus set me free. And even in myself, I ain't need another human being. It was just me and the Lord. What's love got to do? Got to do with it? Everything. What's love got
I love
to do?
you, Liv.
Got to do with it? Everything.
Been homeless for 3 years, and these people want to deny me of blankets when I'm cold. They need to just give me a blanket. That's all I ask for is a blanket. So why is they deny me of blankets, of food when I'm cold? Don't deny me. Look at me. Don't deny me of nothing when I'm the real homeless person. You should bow down to me, because I'm homeless. And you want not to give me a blanket and not give me food.
What do you got to eat?
Look at me. What kind of stuff is that?
Here, darling. You know what? You're cold. Let's do this. Look. Let's get you. You want to go? Here. Let's do this. Put it over here. Wrap it around yourself. Here.
I got it.
So Liz has been coming around a lot more, right? So we're all more focused on her.
It's not like, okay, I need somewhere to stay. She doesn't come and ask for help that way. She comes and she asks for a coat 5 times.
Correct.
In 60 minutes.
They're not gonna keep her at the hospital. Someone presents relatively stable, they are going to release them.
Yes.
She's either in the park, she's sleeping with somebody, or she's sleeping with somebody for money. I mean, she won't tell me.
She was just really dead set on traveling and going everywhere because she would see her mother. Her mother was going to come back to her. Now, her mother has been missing since the age of 4 or 6.
4 or 6, okay.
Yes.
I guess it makes sense that we're struggling because we're not used to a kid being this far gone.
What did you feel across ages? What do you feel were some of the problems? What did you feel like some of the coping mechanisms were? And what did you feel like some of the resources were available to different age groups? Do you think a person's age group can affect what type of resources they're given, their coping strategies? Let's do a little bit of thinking, active thinking.
I would say, honestly, I don't really know much about this. So this is in some way not my first time hearing about it, but like kind of like really thinking about it, if that makes sense. So something that they mentioned in like the high school that I think it's very like true is that there's more resources. Like if you don't have food, you can go there and there's breakfast, there's lunch and things like that. So I feel like it's like in those little aspects, I feel like when you're in high school, you can get a little more resources than when you're like an adult because you're more independent. So it's like you're just like, you can do whatever you want to do. So I feel like that's like the difference that I notice. Also, like my Wi-Fi is terrible, so I kind of like hear like some words, some I don't. So I'm definitely gonna watch everything later. But yeah, like I feel like high school, those are like that aspect, like the food and stuff like that. And since he's like in school, I feel like counselors and stuff are more on top of you. Depends, obviously, because my school was terrible. But like in general, like I feel like it's, yeah, like the resources are more available when you're in high school, maybe.
I agree with Anna. I also feel like for post-secondary challenges, the fact that it's so common, and we kind of talked upon this before in a previous meeting, but it's so common, yet there's so little that's being done. And so that continues to blow my mind, and that change is so hard to make just because of the fact that the policies that we currently have in our education system or government, etc., don't encourage, the support of homeless and or housing insecure, etc. students. It also, I kind of just opened my mind to that last video, the fact that I feel like even being in college when it comes to socially, it broke my heart to see that woman, the fact that she was too far gone. And I thought that, maybe that wouldn't happen for someone that was in college, that continued their education because they have other people around them, that aren't, you're surrounded by just people that may, that comes from all walks of life, not just the, challenges of every day of her having to, live on the streets. I don't know. That video really struck hard. So I definitely, I don't really think about adult homelessness as much. I think we know what it is because that's what the media portrays, but I never really think deeply into it. But I kind of just expanded my mind into how that really looks.
I think in regards to adult homelessness, that just mental health issues can be a lot, like, I don't know, what's the word? They can just be prolonged, or not even prolonged, just like not taken care of as well. Because in high school, even though counselors, they get a bad rap and like they aren't the best in a lot of high schools, um, like you do have, at least you're supposed to have somewhere to go to. And with college, there is like mental health centers. There should be somewhere where you can go to as well. Not necessarily saying that those are always the best, depending on where you are. But when it comes to like adult homelessness, they don't have anyone really to go to. And obviously their struggles are, when you don't have anyone to go to and you're like living on the streets, you probably have like a lot more struggles than the average person, and therefore your mental health will obviously be exasperated. And it's just like a system that doesn't really work very well for people who are adult and homeless. So
y'all are saying just some really great things that are striking me. So here are all the things that you've said so far about opportunities, challenges, resources, and I can say that I completely agree. I completely agree. Just everything going on, especially with the broke student aesthetic under post-secondary and college education. It's like, oh, you're a college student, but you're supposed to be broke. You're not supposed to be homeless. And I think you all have just captured everything that even I saw, both being as a homeless and housing insecure individual. I was like, wait a minute, wait a second. I'm more socially accepted than so-and-so, even though we're in very similar situations. So I thank you for sharing that and bearing with my typos. And my last question I have for you, I know it's 6:47 and I apologize for keeping you all over time, but I can tell that you are all super engaged and I want to just end this off right so no one's feeling unsettled or like, dang, that was awful, that was sad. One other question I have for you is, what did you notice about the attitudes of these individuals going from high school to adulthood? What were their coping mechanisms? What did they rely on for strength? Was it faith? Was it substance? Was it school? How did they approach these situations? What were their mindsets? I could tell for me, there were a lot of different attitudes throughout, a lot of different personalities. But I'm curious to know what you all picked up on.
The people, individuals in high school and college definitely seem to have a lot more faith and hope, especially, I forgot her name, but the college young woman, and she even stated that education was basically her safe haven, her way out, whereas the last woman, older woman who is homeless, was very angry, and rightfully so, to basically be like denied by society in a way. I can't imagine that feeling and having nothing to aspire to, except one day wanting to see her mother. I am so sorry. That literally broke my heart. Oh my God. But so I feel like kind of education can be a way to obtain that hope and faith and positivity, even though it's still extremely difficult. That's not disregarding the challenges that may arise. But as an adult, I think the feelings are intensified and at a higher rate, just because you don't have anything to find solace in.
Yeah, I agree with Maria. Like, I would say that like, when you're in high school or like college, you have this like hope for the future. Like, oh, if I study, maybe I can make it better. You know what I mean? Like, there's a way for me to kind of like get over this path, I guess. But when you get to that like adulthood, it's like, what can I do? Like, I already went through all of this. Like, what's next? Like, there's not something that you can kind of like keep doing. Like, college is like, okay, if I study, maybe I can get a job, maybe I can afford this, afford that. But when you're an adult, it's like what can I do to make it better? You know what I mean? Like, it gets to that point where you're just like this is my reality. So I feel like that's like the difference, or like the way they see it. It's like high school and college, you like they seem more like motivated into kind of like changing their future. And when like this, I don't remember her name, or I don't know if they mention it, but like the one in the adulthood is just like that's her reality, and she's like really struggling with it. Like, she has nothing to, well, like Maria said, like seeing her mom, whatever. But so yeah, I feel like those are like the attitudes that they have.
So thank you for sharing. That was exactly what I was thinking as well. One thing that I'm very surprised that nobody pointed this out, actually. One thing that I found very surprising was with Elizabeth, who was the adult who was staying in the shelter. was her reluctance to ask for help. I thought initially that was something that was only a young people thing because, you know, we're supposed to be strong, we're Gen Z, we're millennials, we're whatever. I found it very surprising that she didn't want to ask for help from that shelter. And I obviously have watched the whole documentary, so I have more of an opinion about Elizabeth as a person and her growth. But if you had watched the entire thing, you would know that this shelter consistently has Elizabeth on the radar. And there are times where Elizabeth shuts down throughout the documentary and doesn't want anything to do with them, which is understandable. I just thought it was interesting about her reluctance, even in the scene that I had showed you all, where she had a plate of food, she had a blanket, and the worker was trying to help her get better. She didn't want that help. And I thought that was interesting for someone who has so little, and not to compare them to the young man in high school or the young woman in college, not to compare their situations, but for someone who had so very little and still being reluctant to ask for help was something that was very interesting to me.
And also, what you said, Brie, I feel like to me is the opposite. I feel like as an adult, it makes more sense for someone to not ask for help, because I feel like after, like, who knows, like maybe so many doors were closed to her that she just gave up, as in like, I'm not gonna ask for help, you know what I mean? Like she's just like in this like self-defense state. So instead of like asking for help, she's just like, well, like what's the point, you know what I mean? I was gonna mention it, but you were just going on, and I'm like, okay, yes, keep going, keep going.
I totally see your point about that, and that makes so much more sense. I think it makes sense both ways, just the human condition of feeling burdensome when you're struggling with something. I think we've all been there. You know, if you're struggling with a test and you don't want to ask your friend to help you, or you don't want to ask someone help on the homework, because not that you don't want to seem dumb, but they have other homework. They have a pet to take care of, you know, like they have to cook dinner. You know, I think it's just the human condition of being afraid to be a burden, but it's always important to remember that you are not a burden. The only burden you are causing is if you won't lighten the load on yourself by sharing it upon others. So I really love that you brought about the reverse side of that. Not so much argument, but just that perspective and that notion in itself. Also, the idea of shelter versus unsheltered. Again, our college friend, the woman of color, the young woman of color that we first saw, she wasn't in shelter. She was in a car, which is not considered shelter. Elizabeth was in a homeless shelter and sleeping on benches, but she had both experiences. And just seeing how some people, regardless of the resources that you have, you can still be going through the exact same problems, but just executing your emotions differently, taking different steps. And I hope that through these videos and through the documentary, you now understand how homelessness is shaped to kind of tailor society's beliefs about it. And I want you to realize that everybody is different. And of course, these are story by story. This is for one person. This is not to make a generalization at all. Keep in mind that these are stories of individuals. But I want you to also keep in mind that these stories can be so different. And one resource is not better than the other. One access to shelter does not define whether someone is in a good space, both physically or mentally. So I'm going to clear the screen again, and we are just about done. But before we head out, I want to leave you all with this quote. So the last quote I have for you all, and I want you to take this with you to home or wherever home may be for you. Just because it's shelter doesn't mean it's home. And this doesn't just go for homeless individuals. This doesn't just go for housing insecure individuals. This goes for everybody. Everybody who's feeling a place of unrest, unsettlement, whether that be in a physical space, emotional or mental space. Just because it's shelter doesn't mean it's home. So do whatever you have to do to find that sense of home. And with that, I hope everybody has a wonderful week. And I hope to see you all again next week. Are there any questions, comments, concerns? Anybody have anything fun next week that they're gonna do? No, we're all boring. Me too.
The only thing that's exciting about next week is that I don't have any exams for the first time. I had 2 exams this week, 3 exams last week, the week before 2, the week before 1. So I'm kind of dying, you know. That's why I'm in like MIA, but I'm back.
We're so glad you are back. So nice to see you.
Oh, I wanted to, like, this has nothing to do with like exams or like anything, but like in regards to like homelessness, there's like, I wanted to talk about this before, but I don't know why I didn't say it. But benches are like being designed now in a like way that like prevents homeless people from like sleeping on them. And it happens in so many like cities and urban areas. And I think that that just like anti-homelessness, I don't know, not stereotype, but the effects of anti-homelessness in government and in like federal offices when it comes to architecture and stuff is very prevalent in a lot of society, and I think it's gross ultimately.
But I wish we had more time to talk about this. There's so much you can go into. I made a little quick list of extra educational resources for you, and it literally talks about the criminalization of homelessness and the architectural aspects of inner cities, which I'm literally going to link in the chat. It's super long. You like don't have to read it, but I think the first page talks about just the criminalization of it and making it illegal to sleep outside, to use public bathrooms without buying something, begging for money, holding up help signs. I wanted to add that in here, but I was like, no, there's just too much already. There's just already too much. But I'm so glad you brought that up.
I want to keep talking about this. Like, this is literally so, like, I don't know. Honestly, like, it's, like I said, like, it's new to me because I just, like, everything that I know, it's based on, like, movies or, like, it's not reality. You know what I mean? It's just, like, media. It's, like, what I hear, what I see, but it's never, I feel like it's never, like, the reality. So this is just so great. I want to keep talking to you guys, especially you guys. Like, you are so, like, informed and everything. I love it. But I can't. I have to study.
Part 2 of housing insecurity, talk about the social justice aspect of it as well. I definitely just wanted to give y'all a baseline because I was like, I can't, initially it was supposed to be social justice and I was like, they're not going to understand a word I'm saying. They're not going to get what's going on. But I'm so glad we did the foundations today. Maybe in a couple weeks, I know Maria's presenting next week. We're going to do like a flipping, like a basis, rotational basis. So next week Maria's going to do something. Maybe after we can come back to this. But yeah, I'm so glad you are all into this, and that gives me more ideas of what to show you all. So always make suggestions. We're so here for them. Yeah, any other questions, concerns, comments, butterflies, anything?
I will say, if like whenever I'm free, you guys are free, maybe we can really talk about this for longer. Because I mean, honestly, I love to talk. I'm a really talkative person. I love it, especially when it's something like interesting. Oof, I just love it. And I'm like very, like, I love to kind of like hear different perspectives, and then like I have my perspective and they're like, you're correcting me, and I'm like, wait, is it or not? I just love this. So thank you for inviting me. This is amazing.
All right, everybody. You all look beautiful. Your smiles are literally like, amazing. But I do know that it is 15 minutes past 6:45, and I'm very sorry. And everybody should go do their homework, eat some dinner, take care of yourself, practice self-love. This was a tough session today. So I'm very proud of everybody for making it through and just really giving all of themselves to the conversation today. It really meant a lot to have you all really contribute and feel comfortable enough to talk about this. So with that, have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Go into next week like the bosses you are, and we will see you next Thursday.
Have a good night.
Hey, everybody.
Bye, guys.